I can bring you in warm, or I can bring you in cold. This is the way. Hello and welcome to the Galactic Core podcast. My name is Andy and I'm your host, as each week we discuss all the TV episodes, films, games and whatever else that takes our fancy in the worlds of Star Wars, Marvel, and anything else nerdy and geeky in between. If this is the first time you found us, then feel free to follow us on social media. The Galactic Core podcast is our name on most things, Instagram, TikTok, we're on Facebook as well. And you can find the podcast on Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music and loads of other places. You can find the links obviously associated in the episode description, and you can keep up to date on all of our latest episodes with all the big news. Today we are going to be talking about all things The Mandalorian, in terms of the finale, and of course what predictions went on for it, and what we think the future for Din Djarin and Grogu will hold. I'm, of course, very, very lucky to be joined by a guest for our episode today. He is one of the hosts of the StarkWarsPod podcast. It's become one of my favourite podcasts to listen to. This guy has got great energy. He's so enthusiastic and he loves to have a chat about this stuff. And to be fair, he also has one of the best moustaches in the podcasting business. Please welcome to the show, Michael O'Rear.
Even complimenting the mustache, Andy. I appreciate it so much.
Welcome to the show, buddy. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. I am so excited to talk some Mandalorian with you here today. I loved this finale, and there's also things that I can complain about. So I will bring a mixture of energies here today.
It's great to have you on. What I want to do just before we jump into chatting about The Mandalorian is just ask a couple of questions just to give the listeners a bit more of a view about yourself and if they haven't heard your sort of show so far. So what is it about sort of nerdy and geeky TV films, TV series and films that you love so much?
See, that's a tough question because I think it actually gets really personal. I think it's a bit of escapism, right? Ever since I was a kid, I was a privileged kid, right? Like I was blessed with a lot of things, but bad things happen too. And the things that I turned to were action figures and movies and stuff like that. So it's something that's just so ingrained in me, and it's kind of like a healthy outlook. It's kind of like escapism, even like maybe the world is a little bleak, but I can jump into this world of adventure and magic that's just so special to me and so ingrained in me. So that's kind of like something as a kid, sitting there playing with action figures, but also now as an adult where I'm like, there's nothing I can think that I would rather do than talk about this stuff, right? I know it more than I know myself. So
there, I can definitely appreciate that sort of view. So what is it that led you down the road to start the Stark Wars podcast? Like I said, I've been very lucky to be on the show with you as well a couple of weeks ago. I was very honoured that you had me on as a guest. And like I said, it's become one of my favourite ones because the energy that you have, the charisma that you have with Tommy as well when you're doing your episodes, it makes it a really good show to listen to. So what is it that led you down that road and what keeps you going with it?
Well, thank you for that. I never really pictured myself being a podcaster. I listened to podcasts a lot, and the more I was listening to podcasts, and typically, actually, it was reality TV podcasts because I'm also a big reality TV fan. And there's one podcast called Rob is a Podcast. It's a pretty big podcast. And they started venturing out and started not talking about reality TV so much, but also scripted shows. And it was around the time that The Mandalorian was starting up, actually, where they talked about all these different shows they were going to talk about, but they didn't ever mention talking about The Mandalorian. And I sent them an email. I was like, okay, listen, guys, I appreciate everything you're doing. But there's this show coming out on Disney Plus. It is the most expensive TV show to date at that time. I was like, it is going to revolutionize not only television but Star Wars, and I would like to come on as the Star Wars expert and talk about it on your podcast, which is it's not unheard of. That's typically how they would get people that would collaborate on the podcast. So I knew that if I wanted a chance to be a part of it, I would just have to send an email. They never got back to me. I was crushed. They didn't even end up talking about The Mandalorian. And I was like, well, how do I fill this void? Because I feel like they're missing an opportunity by not talking about this incredible show. So why don't I just do it for myself? And that's what actually got me started with the podcast. And actually it was on Twitter, and I was kind of ranting about it. I was like, does anyone want to start a podcast with The Mandalorian? And my good buddy Tommy ended up hitting me up. And actually, we weren't even that close at the time. We were more like Twitter friends. We actually have only met. We live on the other side of the country. So we weren't like super close, but he ended up reaching out. I was like, let's do it. And we kind of grown our friendship through the podcast as well. So that's kind of the origin story of Star Wars.
Nice. What is it about Star Wars specifically that's brought you to it and that keeps you going back to it?
Oh man, it's just.
I know that's a big question that it's always out there.
It's like the greatest saga, right? It's the greatest, like the span of what I grew up on was the originals and the prequels, but like being able to follow these characters throughout their and I'm like, I guess I'm a big sci-fi fan. I mean, Star Wars is number one. I don't really like Star Trek that much, honestly, but I really love sci-fi and being able to like follow these characters like throughout my life, right? I mean, my earliest memories as like a person was watching the original trilogy, and then I remember my mom being like, "Oh, there's gonna be more movies," and I was like completely blown away. So I was able to like grow up with these characters, and they became so ingrained in me. And like that's like the easy answer, but also the fact of the matter is like I just like lightsabers and blasters and stuff.
Yeah, can't disagree with you there. You can see I've got 3 of them in the background here, but constantly lighting them up and just wishing them around, going, I wish this was real. Although, to be fair, I'm absolutely convinced if I had a real lightsaber, I'd be dismembering myself probably quicker than anything else.
Yeah, so. Absolutely.
Let's jump in then to discuss The Mandalorian. What a finale. We had an amazing episode last week that brought the emotion and sort of raised the stakes a bit for us. Just capping off that episode in the fact that, the Mandalorians all came together, they were trying to take back, they got ambushed, Din Djarin's taken hostage, and Paz Vizsla gives his life heroically, we're going to say. He really sort of warmed as the series went on, didn't he? And gave his life to make sure that everyone else could escape. So before we jump in to discuss the actual episode, I just want to touch on sort of a lot of the predictions that were going on over the last week before the episode came out, because it was wild, to be fair, the amount of theories that were going on, the amount of different things I was hearing about what was going on. So I'm just going to run through a couple of them and just get your take on those before we jump into discussing the episode in full. So I think the biggest thing that was going on before this was last week's episode was called The Spies. Obviously, we had the woman on Coruscant that obviously we knew that was there. But obviously, the biggest thing that was going on was the Armourer, or possibly even Axe Woves, an Imperial spy from Moff Gideon. What were you thinking? How are you sitting on this particular prediction?
So here's the thing. I've never trusted the Armourer. Since covering the season, episode 1, I was like, I'm out on this chick. She's kind of crazy. She's got these strict rules. And like, I never have trusted the Armourer. I never thought she treated Din correctly, right? She was just kind of mean. She was kind of weird. And like, as it was laid out for us, she was kind of running of a cult, So from that moment, I was always sold on this. Like, I was waiting since the first episode. I was like, let's just come out with it. We know you're bad. And I'm not even, I'm probably the most calm on her now, but I'm not ruling it out still. It's weird because she really has been built up in a very complex way. And, maybe that's the point. But, I never really saw Axe Woves as the possible bad guy. Just because maybe we don't know him enough, and like I just felt like we spent so much time with the Armor, and we focused on a lot of the Armor's flaws, which can make for a compelling character, but it's also going to suss some people out a lot too.
Yeah, absolutely. I have to admit, like I think at the end of last week's episode, like a lot of people, I was sold on the idea that she was definitely an Imperial spy. Everything led down that route. The little horns on the helmet matching, then obviously with Gideon's. The fact that all of these super commando soldiers had Beskar armor, and she was like only an armorer can sort of can forge Beskar into what it needs to be. The fact that in season one, when the Imperials raided the covert back on Navarro, she was the only one that managed to survive out of all the Mandalorians, and she was gathering all their stuff and sort of remelting it down. Everything pointed to this, didn't it? And it turned out to be quite possibly the biggest red herring of all, to be fair.
Big Mephisto vibes here, right?
Everything points to this every single episode, and then it's like it doesn't even know if she was badass in this episode. Let's be honest.
Yeah, exactly.
So the next biggest one that I found was going around was that this show being called The Mandalorian, Din Djarin was no longer what this show focused on as The Mandalorian. It was about Bone. It was about the Mandalorians as a whole. So there was a huge rumor that Din was going to die in this episode, and the mantle was going to be passed over. How are you feeling about the possibility of that happening?
I did hear this theory. I don't know how much I bought into it, but it did make sense. I saw some people laying it out, especially with like how much focus was on training Grogu, that like more so than ever. Like we just get a lot of scenes of him teaching Grogu different things. So, in some respect, it would make sense, but I think it's more so. I think the lesson that we can walk away with is this show isn't necessarily about Din, and it's not. It's more so the death of him as the main character, right? Because now we've opened this door to different cultures within the Mandalore universe. And I think the point that we can walk away with is the Mandalorian is not one person. It's Grogu, it's Bo, it's the armor, and it's anybody else we run into. And I think that's my big takeaway.
Nice. And then probably the last big rumor that was going around in the prediction sort of stakes was the amount of potential cameos that would appear in this last episode. Who was going to come and help the Mandalorians? Who was going to show up? I think some big names like Ahsoka, Sabine, with all of their connections to Bo-Katan could possibly show up. Obviously Boba Fett as well, sort of them returning the favour of stealing an episode and a half of his show by having him come back. But obviously, I think the biggest one that I heard was obviously that there was going to be a cameo from Thrawn. Whether he comes back and sort of puts Moff Gideon in his place, or whether it's sort of a post-credit scene. I personally never saw Thrawn showing up in this series. They've built him too much up to be appearing in the Ahsoka series, and I don't think they were ever going to give that big reveal away before the Ahsoka series. But did you want Thrawn to show up? Who else did you think was going to show up? Where were you on this one?
So I didn't necessarily. I kind of see where they're very much. Thrawn is like Jaws, right? You're not going to see Jaws until like the end, and I think the more they can keep him hidden, the more they can build up the mystery of Thrawn, especially to like the casual audience. I think that is for the better. Now, one thing that did surprise me is like we got this cameo from Zeb in this series, and I kind of figured that there would be something, right? It seemed like almost a setup for a setup, right? I thought that there would be something that we would see, kind of like you said, a post-credit scene that would kind of connect us to the Ahsoka show that's coming out. And the fact that they didn't really nail that on the head, I'm not upset with it, but it was unexpected. I thought for sure there would be, again, whether it be Sabine or Hera, there would be something at the end, maybe not necessarily coming to rescue them, but kind of like when they go back to like the New Republic bar or something. That would have been a situation where like Mando actually got to meet somebody. Again, not upset about it, but kind of surprised.
Yeah, I have to admit, I was probably expecting at least one or two cameos to pop up. Like you said, even if it wasn't necessarily helping them, because I think they steered away from that simply to have the Mandalorians deal with it by themselves. And it'd be like, this is our group, we're going to deal with this, we're not going to bring anyone else into this. But yeah, when they went back to the Republic bar at the end of the episode, we obviously see Dave Filoni and a couple of others in the background there. But I have to admit, I was expecting maybe Zeb or someone else to just poke their head up and or even just be in that background, just to give that bit more weight to this is what's coming. Hey, look, here's the characters. Not that long to go. Well, obviously not long. 4 months or so until we get the Ahsoka series. But it's going to be a good one, to be fair. In terms of your own personal, did you have predictions? Did you have anything that you thought was definitely going to happen in this episode, or that you really, really wanted to that didn't?
So again, I like my number one theory was the armor. So that one was out, but there was something else that I really expected to come up. And if you remember the penultimate episode, there was a great giant kaiju like monster that came out and kind of crashed their barge, and that's kind of how they ended up going to the caves. And my thought was like, well, that thing's still out there, right? I thought they were going to go down and get the mythosaur and then have like a giant,
Yeah.
Godzilla versus Kong moment. And that didn't happen either. I actually am surprised we didn't get more of the mythosaur in this finale. But yeah, that's definitely one I missed the mark on.
I think a lot of people were, and myself included, saying the mythosaur has to reappear at this moment. The whole sort of predictions of from years gone by that the mythosaur has to reappear for a new Mandalore, and whether it was going to be Bo riding him into battle, a bit like Boba Fett did with the Rancor, on the same way that Grogu may tame the mythosaur. I think it was a big miss out that we didn't get to see him. I guess they didn't want to go too big; they just wanted to concentrate on literally what was happening there, and not sort of go too far outside that. They've got room to explore that, obviously. I think we're getting at least one more series of Mando before they decide to call it quits. So maybe we get the mythosaur again. Who knows? I'm definitely hoping that he's gonna. Say he. I don't know whether it's a he or not. To be fair, but hopefully we get the mythosaur again. I think in the future. I think it's going to still play a part. They keep giving us one or two shots of it. I think it's still got a role to play moving forward. So. Let's dive into the episode itself then, and have a chat about the episode as it sort of went on, and get your thoughts on what was going on here. So obviously we start the episode off, which sort of picks up from last week, where the Din and Koska are taking who's left of the Mandos and trying to escape, and obviously Din's being taken, and he manages to escape with the help of IG Grogu, and his fanatical no button. To be fair. And they obviously decide that they can't run anymore, and that they have to take out Gideon if they're going to survive. And he obviously ropes in R5 to help him out, and he had his cute little moment with the mouse droids and the little sirens going off. And obviously that leads them to his battle with the sort of super commandos in the tunnel before the command center. How did you feel about that sort of entire sequence?
Yeah, that actually is my favorite sequence of the episode. And here's the thing, like, I kind of got in trouble on TikTok. Some of the people on TikTok got mad at me because I said Din was a bully to the droids. So I was kind of down on Din for a little bit. But with that being said, I thought this was Din's best episode. Some of the action sequences here were awesome. I really like his relationship with R5, where, he doesn't understand R5, but R5 understands him. And it's like this little banter they have going back and forth. I really enjoyed this fight sequence, and then obviously Grogu saving Din. I was kind of surprised that it happened that early because they kind of set it up where like all the other finales had to do with Din saving Grogu, and I thought, oh, now it's all about Grogu saving Din, and they kind of got that out of the way in the first couple minutes, which again, not upset about because we got some great action sequences, but something to note.
And then that battle itself, where they're obviously going through into the command center, I think it was good to show that Din is still just as good at hand-to-hand combat as he is with, obviously, Mandalorians. The whole, my weapons are my religion, and to show him sort of taking out, a plethora of super commandos, I think was definitely a fantastic sequence. His relationship with R5, we touched on there, it does remind me a little bit of sort of early days Luke and R2 relationship. Although Luke always seemed to have a translator around him somewhere to be able to understand what R2 was saying, but it gives off, to me, those very similar vibes of early Luke and R2. And the fact that obviously R5 is sort of dating back to the days of the rebellion and sort of still reports back to them in a little bit. Do you see anything big for R5 in the future? I don't mean big as in obviously he's going to get his own series or anything like that, but he's obviously played an important part, as we know that, in the original film itself, he blew his motivator to be able to allow R2 to be the one that goes forward, and basically he's the catalyst for saving the rebellion in a way, isn't he?
Again, I'm like, how big can R5 really be? I will say I see him as like a definite point in Din's team from here on out. You know, there's some great shots of like Bo, Grogu, Din, and R5 in that little Mandalore shuttle type thing. And I was like, this is our team. And I really like this team. You know, it takes me back to like, you know, Luke, Han, Leia, Chewie, and the Falcon. And, you know, this is like another version of that. So I see him filling kind of the R2 role, you know, nothing too grand, but I think he's definitely a staple in Din's life now.
Nice. And then I guess we move on to the fact that obviously Axe is somehow managing to fly through this damaged atmosphere of Mandalore and get into space, and he gets the ship to warn everyone. And they're basically like, right, send everyone to the surface. We're going to use the capital ship as a big sort of decoy. And I was still tentatively expecting maybe, you know, the Axe Wove's betrayal at this moment in time. Whether he sort of used the capital ship then against them, or what? Did you sort of feel anything about that moment in terms of a potential betrayal, or was it just simply he was just doing his job, getting everyone out, and he was going to be the decoy?
Yeah, again, I was still stuck on the armor a fair bit, but the big thing that did surprise me was when he was doing all this, I was like, he's going to die. He's like sacrificing himself at this point. You know, whether it's going through the storm, which was very risky, whether it was taking the ship and telling everyone else to get off, you know, it seemed like the Holdo maneuver from The Last Jedi. It seemed very similar to that, where he was going to maybe kamikaze his way out of the situation. But the fact that he made it through the storm, he made it onto the ship, and then he crashed the ship, and he's still alive. That's the thing that shocked me the most. I thought he was toast here.
And then we sort of go back to Din and Grogu making their way to this command center, and they go through this room that's full of obviously tanks of clones, and we finally get this reveal that the clones that, you know, Gideon and Dr. Pershing and all the rest have been working on are clones of Moff Gideon himself. We get that sort of classic horror moment in a way that, you know, Grogu's creeping up to the tank and looking at one of them, and all of a sudden he opens his eyes and he's like, ah, and sort of runs away. How are you feeling about the reveal that the clones are Gideon clones?
You know, I'm a little disappointed they weren't Snoke clones, but I guess we'll get there eventually, right? I think this is the first step towards that. You know, it was not something I expected. Again, I would have guessed that there were Snoke clones, but it's interesting. And, you know, I think there's a good possibility this isn't the last we see of them, or at least one of them. I refuse to believe that all of this happened for no reason.
That's fair enough. Yeah, I think I'm with you. I was a little bit surprised that they were Gideon clones, but at the same time, the guy's got an ego the size of a mountain, isn't he? So it's maybe no surprise that he's like, I'm going to clone myself because I'm the best. Why not? Then we get back to the other Mandalorians who have managed to escape. They sort of taking refuge for a little bit. And it gives us that little moment where they're in a sort of garden that's been cultivated by the surface Mandalorians that have been there since the Purge, sort of showing that, you know, the Mandalore of old can return because it's been centuries of civil war and infighting that's destroyed the planet before the Empire sort of jumped on that as well. So I think a nice little touch that they're sort of laying all this groundwork for the future of Mandalore and saying, hey, you can restore yourself and you can bring yourself back. And then we get the reinforcements turn up, led by the armorer. And they then go to engage the troops in battle. Can I just say how badass this moment I think was, where they all obviously jet back out of the ship, the armorer jumps out with them, they all join together, and they go down there, and it's, you know, the classic let's charge. And not the fact that the armorer herself, she doesn't have a gun, she doesn't have a sword or anything like that. She just goes in with her forging tools. And she's just there, like, hammering the crap out of these super commandos with her hammer. Like, to me, that was one of the most badass bits of the episode.
Yeah, to be fair, it was really cool, but it was almost laughable at first because we get Bo who pulls out the Darksaber, and then we get Costa with her guns, and then you see the armor with like a wrench. It's like it's kind of a joke, but no, she was going through it like Thor and Mjolnir, man. She was wrecking them.
Yeah. That was definitely a Thor moment. I mean, I think I was with you the very first time I watched this episode yesterday. I was like, that's a bit of a joke, isn't it? Everyone's got these great weapons, and then she's just there with a hammer and a wrench. But I've watched the episode like 2 or 3 times since, and the more I see it now, the more like, that's just badass moment, to be fair.
Yeah, if it works, it
How,
works, man.
yeah, how would you think you would fare in a situation like that?
Are you kidding me? Well, first of all, I don't like heights, so I wouldn't put the jetpack on to begin with. I would be, I'd probably, if anything, I would take the Axe Woves position. I would like to be on the ship, away from the battle.
And then obviously we go back to the fact that we've got Din and Grogu on the ground, and he's confronted by Moff Gideon. In this, let's face it, badass sort of next generation Dark Trooper uniform that got the reveal in the last episode. And he brings forward the reveal that not only obviously was he cultivating his own clones, but he looks like from what he was saying, anyway, he managed to crack the fact that he was going to get them to be Force sensitive. So he was going to have an army of himself as clones that were going to be Force sensitive. How are you feeling about that? Because to me, I was a bit like, how has he managed to crack that so quickly?
Yeah, so I think there's still a lot to learn about the process, and I think we've talked about it. And as far as the Bad Batch goes, I think that's a good place where we're going to learn about some of this stuff. But I think it's interesting because when we go back to the Shadow Council in the last episode, he says that the cloning obsession was on Hux. He was like, "This is your thing, not mine." And of course, we find out here that it is also his thing too. So if cloning is not his thing, quote unquote, and he did this, it makes me wonder what Hux is doing to make him look like the guy that is really obsessed with it. So, again, I think there's a lot more to come.
I think that's fair because obviously they're talking about Project Necromancer, which anyone that knows a little bit about Star Wars knows that is the project to obviously clone Palpatine and bring him back. So the fact that they've got this whole separate project on, which by the sounds of it, that the Empire remnants are putting a lot of resources towards, obviously getting this project sort of sorted. So the fact that he seems to have beaten Project Necromancer to being able to have Force sensitive clones, to me was a little bit off, not something I sort of thought would have really happened, because at the end of the day, maybe Moff Gideon was the one that seems to be more sort of self-involved, like we talked about his ego, so he's there sort of trying to secure his own future rather than sort of being there for the betterment and the return of the Empire.
Yeah, and the way he's been talking about it and the way he kind of like dogs on Thrawn, I kind of thought the downfall of Gideon would be Thrawn, right? Like, I keep bringing up Marvel things, so I apologize, but it's very similar to, the way they wanted to showcase Thanos' strength is by killing the greatest villain in the MCU, which was Loki, right? That was like their example of, if you thought Loki was bad, check out this Thanos guy. And I kind of figured that, if you think Gideon's bad, wait till you see Thrawn. And the fact that that's not how it went down is a little suspect to me. I think there's a lot more going on because, again, it almost seems like a rivalry has been built up a little bit. So, I'm going to put a pin in that. I don't necessarily think this is the last we'll see of little Gideon here.
It's an interesting point we'll get to in a little bit, I think, because I've got a question for you on that one. But then obviously we get sort of the battle between Gideon and Mando facing down against each other. And here I think we get to see a big difference between their battle at the end of season 2, because Gideon's got this dark trooper armor. It obviously seems to enhance his abilities and his strength. And it looks like, Din possibly is going to get defeated. And then obviously the Praetorian Guards come out as well. And he just like, if it wasn't sort of a little bit unfair as it was, he's now got to deal with all these guys. He's getting his butt whooped a little bit. And then IG Grogu pops back up with quite possibly the most emotional shriek I've heard him make in the entire Mando series. And he's aggressive, no. And obviously he then, sort of draws the Praetorian Guards away. Din's trying to get to him because he gives quite an emotional no out to him as well, because he's like, no, don't, how dare you touch my son? And he's obviously stopped from doing that by Gideon. So that looked like it was going to be an emotional battle. And Grogu himself getting that emotional about obviously having to stop them, hurting Din, I think shows a great bit, because we always see how emotional Din is about Grogu and the fact that he saved him. So to see an emotional response from Grogu towards Din being attacked, we know obviously he's protected him before, but to physically get to see that, I think, is showing a lot of growth for us on Grogu's front. How are you seeing that one?
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think um this is something I've gotten into on my podcast a little bit, and I'm a little judgmental of how Din is as a father, right? He seems to put, like, when Grogu was being attacked by the Praetorian guards and he was standing by watching, I was like, dude, you always put Grogu in these situations where he's going to get in trouble. I think back to, I don't know if you're a Walking Dead fan, but Rick and Carl, right?
Mm.
Father and son. Carl always wanted to be in with the battle, right? And Rick was always putting him on the sidelines because he wanted to protect his son. And Grogu, or Din, never does this for Grogu, which kind of shocks me. He goes right into the heat of battle with Grogu, which, I guess it shows how much respect he has for Grogu and how much he thinks he can hold his own. But at the same time, I was like, dude, you put him in this bad situation. Now he's getting hurt. What'd you expect, bro?
I was almost expecting what we've seen in previous episodes of Grogu basically just start force choking the Praetorian guards, and that was going to be his way to save him. But obviously, we get this whole shot of obviously the Praetorian guards versus Grogu. The IG suit, so to speak, is taken care of pretty quickly. And then we get basically Grogu parkour going on for a little bit as he runs around the room, trying to avoid them. Din and Moff Gideon are continuing their battle, and Bo sort of sees them and joins in. And then we get this cool sort of Darksaber versus Electro Staff battle. The Electro Staff is a weapon that I actually quite like. Obviously, we see it in the prequels, and don't really get to see it too much after that. So the fact that he brings out this cool Electro Staff weapon, and obviously we get to see the Din manages to obviously escape and go and help out Grogu, and they work together as a great sort of couple, to be fair. Grogu using the Force and Din just kicking ass to take out the Praetorian guards. Probably one of my favourite fight sequences of the entire series, to be fair. How are you feeling on that one?
Yeah, I totally agree. Like I've said, this is like, Den has gone like full John Wick out here. It is really incredible stuff. I think this is the best we've seen of Den, and it's a great way to end the season with just some kick-ass stuff right here.
I heard a few grumblings and complaints about the fact that Din manages to take out all three of the Praetorian guards with obviously a little bit of help from Grogu, whereas Paz Vizsla was sort of dispatched very quickly by them. And I thought that was a bit unfair because I point out that Paz had already been through an exhausting battle of himself because he'd taken out so many super commandos on his own, and then sort of was at the mercy really. And obviously he's a skilled fighter, but maybe not quite as skilled as Din. So I thought it was a maybe unfair comparison. Did you expect? I always say we always expect maybe bigger and better things as every series and every new film that comes out is given to us. But did you maybe expect a bit more from Grogu in this particular little battle rather than just a few force pushes here and there?
No, I mean, I honestly, I was pretty impressed with what he did in general. It was very impressive to see him come out with some of his force powers, and in the past, it's like a lot of like Grogu as like a baby, his cognitive ability sometimes doesn't always understand what's going on, right? But in this scene, it was like he totally knows everything. He knows who the threats are. He knows what he needs to do. He knows what he's capable of, and he pulls it off. So yeah, and he's good at it too, right? I think that's been a big lesson we've learned this season, with two separate scenes where Din's like, I didn't teach him that. He learned a lot from Luke, and I think he was a big reason why this battle was won here.
I think that's fair enough. The whole thing about he's potentially spent a year or two with Luke doing a little bit of training. I don't know if you buy into this timeline that we seem to have been given, that this is from the start of the Mandalorian to where we are now has taken sort of over 3 to 4 years to get through. So theoretically, he spent a year or two training with Luke. So I think it was maybe nice to see if that is the case, or even obviously he spent a few months with him. We've seen some advancement in Grogu with this training, and it's good to see that. Rumor, obviously, a huge rumor going around that with the new sort of Jedi Order film that's going to be coming out with Daisy Ridley, that's going to be set sort of 15 years after the sequels. Assuming, obviously, nothing bad happens to Grogu in between now and then, Do you give any weight to the potential theory that Grogu could be part of that new Jedi Order?
Yeah, I would bet money on it. I don't, this is like the most beloved character that they've maybe ever had in Star Wars. I just don't see a situation where, number one, we've got Dave Filoni, and what we know from Dave Filoni is he hates killing his characters, right?
Yeah.
He holds on to them like a railing, but so that's number one. Number two, again, is like one of the most beloved characters of all time. And yeah, he's gonna be there. There's no doubt in my mind, and I can't wait to see Ray and Grogu go at it. So this is gonna be good stuff down the road.
I'm with you. I certainly expect him to maybe show up in that, and I really hope he does because I want to see those interactions, sort of with the wider Star Wars universe and everyone reacting to this little green guy.
Yeah.
And hopefully he's learned to speak by then as well,
Yes.
because he's got another 50, like maybe 30, 40, 50 years to be able to learn how to start speaking. Going back to the episode, so we then see Axe-Woves comes basically steaming in with a battered capital ship, and he's like, "Everyone, get your asses out of there! I'm gonna take out this base with the ship." Sort of a classic moment. I was edge of my seat by this point because I'm like, "Is he going to go down with the ship?" And obviously not. He's got a bloody jetpack; he can get himself out of there. So he manages to get out. But while that's going on, we get this sort of great moment where Din and Grogu come out and they team up with Bo to have a battle against Gideon. But just before that, obviously, we're getting a bit more of the battle between Gideon and Bo-Katan. And what came as the shock to me is this moment where obviously he crushes the Darksaber with his hand, and so the Darksaber is going to become no more. You're shaking your head there, man. Tell me how you're feeling about this, the destruction of the Darksaber.
I don't remember the last time I was this mad at Star Wars. I was pissed. I love the Darksaber. It felt like a crime to destroy it, but it took a couple hours. But after I had soaked in the information a little bit, I gotten over my initial denial of it all. I feel like this might be a good thing. I see a situation where the Darksaber gets rebuilt, and maybe it's smaller this time for Grogu. No, but like really, I think this is a thing that they do a lot in the Mandalorian. For instance, when they blew up the Razor Crest, and now he gets an upgrade in the N1 Starfighter. So I will be tentative. I will wait to see what they do with this. I have a hard time believing this is just the end of the Darksaber. It's just that's too sad, and I'm not willing to accept that just yet.
I'm with you. I was enraged at first because I'm like, first of all, in the sequels, you destroy Anakin's saber. How dare you? And now you're destroying the Darksaber. I was, I got, I made a few comments on social media straight after I watched this episode about the destruction of the Darksaber, and I got hounded a little bit for my lack of foresight about the meaning behind the destruction of it. Because obviously during their battle after he's destroyed the Darksaber, Moff Gideon's talking to her about, you no longer have the Darksaber, it's time for you to give up. And she was like, because he was like, the Mandalorians only value their trinkets, and she's like, absolutely not. Mandalorians are stronger together. And was this the moment that Bo realized she didn't need the Darksaber to lead the Mandalorians? It was about having the Mandalorians together as a group. And someone actually even, I'm going to steal their analogy for this, it was like Spider-Man Homecoming moment when Peter and Tony are there together, and Peter's like, I need the suit. I'm nothing without the suit. And Tony's like, if you're nothing without the suit, then you shouldn't have it. Do you feel it's fair to have a similar comparison to Bo and the Darksaber? Does she need it to rule Mandalore and bring together, or is this was her moment realizing that she doesn't need that moving forward?
It's a good point. It's something I didn't consider, is that this is like a big character moment for Bo. So, I'm willing to accept that. It's just tough because this is a thing that's been around for so long, and it's always interesting to see who's going to be wielding that thing next. And again, I don't think it's completely gone. I think that there's an opportunity for something else to come of it. With that being said, though, it's a good point. You're right. This was, a lot of this scene was about Bo's character development, where she talks about in the previous episode where she had originally surrendered to Moff Gideon, and she came in here not willing to do that again, and he took all her tools away, and it didn't matter. So I do think that's awesome.
It was a good moment, and that obviously leads into the sort of the three of them joining together to sort of take down Gideon. So they're all taking their different opportunities to knock him down, to fire at him. Grogu's knocking him over with his force push and getting rid of his electro staff. And then obviously the ship comes crashing down, and it looks like Moff Gideon is vaporized in the inferno ball that follows. I've seen some wild theories about this. I don't think it's a surprise that obviously people are saying, is he actually dead? You know, that we talked about on your show. I think the whole thing of, do you physically see them lying there dead? Are they actually dead? And people even going as far as to say, you know, in the first 2 seasons of The Mandalorian, Moff Gideon had a mustache. His clones that we saw in the tank didn't have a mustache, and he didn't have a mustache now. So was this a clone? And is the real Moff Gideon still out there? How are you feeling? I personally hate this theory because I'm like, why are you giving this character sort of this big final battle and a death scene if he's not actually going to be dying, and they're just going to rehash him and go, no, it was a clone. He's actually the real one's off somewhere else. How are you feeling about that particular kind of theory?
So I'll counter that theory with a slightly different theory, although it is similar. I think that was the real Moff Gideon, and I do think the real Moff Gideon is dead. Now, there were clones, and there could be clones in other locations, and it's not something I'm necessarily thrilled about. You know, I do like that when these shows have like actual stakes and characters die, because, you know, a lot of times when you just bring people back to life, it's like, well, it kind of takes away from every other death scene, because then you're just wondering, oh, well, they could do that with this guy. And that's the thing they do in Star Wars, right? It started with Darth Maul, then it went to Palpatine, and then Boba Fett, right? It's something they love to do, especially with the villains. So I'm willing to bet that he will return in some capacity. My thought is it's one of his clones in some way. But I guess we'll see. It's hard to say. I would say, based on the track record of Star Wars, it's going to happen, but it's not necessarily something I want. It's just something I think.
Yeah, I mean, we talked on your show when I was on a few weeks back about the fact that I personally am not a whole fan of this, the fact that they can't tend to let people die, or they're unwilling to sort of let someone make a huge sacrifice. I know Paz Vizsla did last week, but, you know, he is, for the best part, a side character. I still think Star Wars is afraid to kill off the main characters. And do you think this episode as a whole suffers for the lack of a big death apart from Moff Gideon?
Yeah, I do. Again, I kind of thought that, you know, at least Axe Woves could have gone here. Honestly, now that I'm thinking about it, did any of the Mandalorians die in this episode? I don't know. I don't know if there was a scene where one of the, even like a background character was shot down. I'm sure there's something I'm not thinking about, but, you know, again, it's like you want these moments to have like some risk factor to them. You want us to be on the edge of our seat, and if we feel like, oh well, they're never going to kill Bo or Din or Grogu, or, you know, if like everyone is safe 100% of the time, then these battles really don't mean anything. And, you know, it's weird to say that, like, I feel like we need death, but we need some death. And in some capacity, I felt like, and again, maybe it was one of like these Mandalorian like surface dwellers that came on the barge, you know, maybe one of them, even just like a super minor side character. And again, I know we had Paz, but within this episode, you're right. You know, it's very rare for a battle, even in real life, to end with no casualties on one side.
I just think like I said, Star Wars backed themselves into a corner with this. I think with the announcement that we're getting this Dave Filoni film that's going to be wrapping up the Mandoverse, predicted to come out in sort of 3 or 4 years' time. So does that really put, again, sort of something on there that says we're not really going to get rid of these characters before then, or anyone significant, because we need them for this film? So to me, that it just sticks a little bit in my brain, because, like I say, I think you need to have bigger deaths sometimes to serve the bigger purpose. And I think sometimes they put everything as too much of a heroic death. So when it is time for someone to go out, it has to be the big blaze of glory, and it has to mean everything. And I'm like, sometimes in these battles, the best people get cut down, and there's no rhyme or reason behind it. And I think sometimes you need that to fuel the story for other characters and go, this person was a big part of my life, but they were cut down for no rhyme and reason. They were taken out by a lucky sniper shot for, the back of the head or something like that. Do you know what I mean? So I think it's something that Star Wars really has an issue with, and I hope that they do start to fix that. But I don't ever see that happening, because they like having their happy endings. as we will get to in this episode, to be fair. So that the whole ship comes crashing down, Moff Gideon's vaporized, and we see the mirroring of the Series 1 finale, where we've got Din, Bo, and we've got Grogu using the Force to create that little bubble around them and deflect this massive inferno ball. And it really was obviously a great mirror scene to sort of season 1. Is that the kind of scene that you love to see when they're mirroring previous sort of things that have gone on?
Yeah, I mean, that is the point of Star Wars. It's kind of memeified that George Lucas says that Star Wars rhymes, right? But yeah, this is what I look for. I love the parallels, so I'm all about it.
And then the battle is over. The base is destroyed. They've reclaimed Mandalore for themselves. And we get them all gathered down at the living waters that we've seen, Bo and Din at before. And Ragnar, son of Paz Vizsla, is getting himself baptized and set in the way. And obviously Din puts Grogu forth to no longer be a foundling, to become his apprentice. And the armourer, being as harsh and critical as ever, going, well, the dude can't speak, he can't take the right, so therefore no. And we get this emotional moment where then obviously Din Djarin adopts Grogu. And he's now known as Din Grogu, which is very, very cute. So to me, that's right. Is Din's first name not Din? We've got Din Grogu. Is it like maybe like Asian names where it's surname first, and so his first name's actually Djarin? It's Djarin Din. But a cute moment that we get him to see fully adopted.
Yeah, but no, we talked about this on my podcast. We're not sure how this works. Are they going to call Grogu Din from now on? Are there 2 Dins? How does all this work? But no, regardless, it was a very nice scene to see this kind of like officiated in a way. And I did like the fact that it's not something I necessarily was expecting, but it makes sense in hindsight. The fact that they finished like the baptism of Ragnar, like because it was interrupted by like the sea monster in the first episode. So, again, not something I really was asking for, but I was like, oh, they kind of paid attention that like, hey, this guy still needs his service finished.
I did have a split second thought when obviously they're talking about the fact that Grogu can't speak, so he can't take the right, and the armourer says, well, his parents are far away from here, if they're even alive. And for a split second I thought, is this going to be what season 4 is about, where Din's actually going to try and find the species of Grogu and Yoda? Obviously, that was swept away pretty quickly by the fact that he adopts them. But then we get that little moment, obviously, where Grogu maybe sort of looks into the water and he almost seems to sort of force feel into it. And we get that shot through the water, and then the mythosaur again seems to be awakened. So is that leading, do you think, to a future connection between Grogu and the mythosaur as opposed to Bo and the mythosaur?
It just seems like the mythosaur is such a part of Bo's story. It's hard for me to imagine. And also, I think it would be a little weird to see Grogu on the mythosaur, but I guess I can't rule it out just yet. But, if I were to put my money down, I would say still the mythosaur is Bo's beast to conquer.
I just always think that, it seems that Grogu has that sort of forced connection with animals the same way that Ezra did in Rebels. The fact that he was able to do that, because we see him do it with a few of them. We see him do it with the Rancor in Book of Boba Fett. That's why I was like, oh, maybe my money's more on Grogu connecting with the mythosaur rather than Din, perhaps. But we obviously will see that hopefully in the future. And we get to obviously a lovely scene where we get to see the Great Forge and basically the rebirth of Mandalore. I always love those kind of moments when it's at the end and they're sort of realizing everything's coming together, and you've got all of the Mandalorians from both sort of factions all together, and Axel was shouting, "Yeah, for Mandalore!" It was, for me, it's like, I love those little emotional moments in there, and especially what is now the rebirth of the Mandalore and their planet. I think we're going to get a lot of focus on that in the future, whether we get more focus on that and maybe season 4, or whether they get like their own sort of maybe little episode, own little series to do with that. How do you see the future of Mandalore going?
I can't pinpoint it, honestly, but I'm excited to see what it is. I feel like it's going to be really cool to see where they go with it. Did they go back to like the mines and like build out their civilization underground, or do they come on top and build out their vegetation and have like a surface dwelling type community? I'm very excited to see where they take this and how this community is going to foster, for sure.
And then we get to basically the end of the episode. Din touches down on the New Republic base, works out sort of a deal with them that he's going to be hunting down Imperial remnants, sort of on the sly, under the table payment, to keep off the radar of the New Republic. They get the IG head from the bar. Some people have talked about, obviously, some of the helmets are up there, and you saw next to the IG head there was a Stormtrooper helmet that sort of had the claws down it, which a lot of people sort of was maybe a reference to sort of the Ewok hunt game from Star Wars Battlefront 2. I don't know if you ever got to play that game, but there was a great trailer when they brought out that particular part of the game, and sort of how savage Ewoks are. So I like to think that was a nice little sort of moment, sort of referencing that. And then obviously we get back to Navarro. Grief Karga is giving them obviously a nice little cabin outside of town, and we get to see IG-11 restored to him fully self. And we finish on this scene of Mando and Grogu sitting outside their cabin. Mando's got his feet up. He's like, cool, I've got a place to rest whilst I'm doing bits and pieces. Grogu's happy because he gets to force play with the frogs. And we get that sort of cute little circles into them, and it ends. Did this feel more like an ending of the entire series as a whole, as opposed to a season finale?
So it is like a very happy ending, quote unquote, but I think they did set up the fact that there's still a lot of missions for Din to go on. And I think this is kind of like a reset, if anything, not necessarily an ending, but a reset where, Din has kind of accomplished his goal with the Mandalorians, and now it's back to his origins where he's a bounty hunter, and Grogu's going to be involved in that. And I really like that aspect. It is like very peaceful right now, but I see a situation where they're going to be going into action again soon, and I'm excited for it.
It was a very rounded way to end it, wasn't it? Because almost everything was resolved and tied up in a nice little bow, which sometimes obviously happens. Sometimes they leave things on cliffhangers. I know that for the previous two seasons, they've always ended it with a little bit of a question. But as you said, this rounded everything up in a very nice way. There's still work for them to do in the future. Obviously, we know that Jon Favreau says that he has been ranked season 4, so it's not like we know that this is the very end of it. My personal thoughts were, because they wrapped everything up in a nice way, maybe season 4 will focus on the rebirth of Mandalore a bit more. Because they've not been afraid to step away from Din and Grogu and focus more on the Mandalorians this season. And maybe they focus sort of half and half next season. So you get episodes where you've got Din and Grogu hunting down Imperial remnants, or maybe we see some fallout of the Ahsoka series with Thrawn's return. But it still focuses a bit more on the Mandalorians as a whole. What are your personal predictions then moving forward? Because I know we can't obviously say much with the Ahsoka series not out yet. How much of an impact do you see that having on the future of the next series of The Mandalorian?
No, I think you laid it out well, and you actually laid it out very similar to how Tommy did, my co-host. He is very much on the same side where we're kind of getting this split story, and he is very much interested in learning about like how the Mandalorians are going to rebuild and a lot of the lore going on there. And actually I wouldn't mind to go back to kind of like some of the early season 1 stuff where it's just kind of Din like on solo missions. I know a lot, like the word filler episode gets thrown out a lot, but I love bounty hunters, and I feel like we actually haven't had a lot of bounty hunters, because every time we meet a bounty hunter, they end up doing something different, right? Din was a bounty hunter, and then he ends up fostering Grogu. Boba Fett was a bounty hunter, and then he ends up doing whatever he does in that show. So I don't know. It would be nice to get a couple episodes of him out there, just hunting down some scumbags.
I know what you mean. I mean, any other bounty hunters you really want to see make cameos moving forward to, say, season 4? Because we know there's plenty of them out there that we've seen in previous bits and pieces of Star Wars. So are there any sort of like, I must see this bounty hunter next sort of situation for you?
If there's one on my radar, it's going to be Bosk. And I know Bosk has had some moments in the comics, and I'm not sure if they ever ended up on where his fate is. I don't know if he ever died in the comics or what happened there. But, if we can get Bosk in here, that would be awesome. I would love to see that.
I think I saw a rumor, maybe it might have been earlier on today, actually, that some leaked shots potentially of him have come out of the next Andor series. There
Oh,
was, it looked like he was potentially with, I think, I'm trying to remember off the top of my head because it was a very quick thing I saw. There seemed to be a shot of him with Mon Mothma.
oh
Um,
wow.
uh, so perhaps, she hires him to take out some people that are getting a bit too close to what she's trying to do in Andor. So you might get your wish, just maybe not in the Mando series. To be
Okay.
fair,
Hey,
I think
I'll
everyone
take
wants to
it.
see Bosk.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's not a hot take.
So let's just have a quick chat about the series as a whole. Then, Series 3, as it's now over. How do you feel about this series as a whole and the story building that it's done?
It's very complicated, and I'm still kind of wrestling with it, right? I feel like, if this was just a TV show on HBO, right, how would I feel about it? And I feel like there was a lot of stuff in this season. There was no one episode that I disliked. I enjoyed every episode, but when I look at them as a whole, sometimes I wonder if there was a better way to tackle it, because I felt like there was a lot of things that happened that didn't have a whole lot of payoff, right? I feel like
Hmm.
we could have gotten more from Elia Kane and Dr. Pershing, like that like kind of throwaway episode. Like, I know we're gonna get back to some of that stuff in the future, but like the fact that we didn't visit in this season, kind of weird to me. The fact that we haven't really gotten more from the Mythosaur, even though that was like a huge arc within the series. There's a lot of cameos that we got that I thought we could have circled back on. I mentioned Zeb. I thought we could have gotten another flashback on Killer and Beck.
Hmm.
There's just a lot of stuff that happened that like it just kind of set up things for the future. And I know that's what Star Wars is, but for this being a season as a whole, again, liking all episodes, but together, I don't know that it perfectly fits. And it's not my favorite season. I'm going to admit that up front. But it's setting up things for the future, and that's okay.
Well, what has been your favourite season so far?
Probably season one. So I started rewatching season two, and I have a couple complaints about that one as well. I think it very much just it kind of dealt with the same thing season three did, where it was relying on a lot of cameos, and like every episode, the ending of every episode of season two is like, oh, let's say this name or show this person, and then the next episode that we're gonna deal with that person. It's like it's almost like it didn't deal with the story in and of itself. So I think I'm still partial to season one. And again, it sounds like I'm complaining a lot. I love all this stuff, So yeah, don't take it too seriously.
And out of the three season finales that we've had so far, where do you rank this season's one? Obviously, it's only 1 to 3. I think a lot of people are always going to put the series 2 finale at number one
Yeah.
because of the whole battle that they had, and then obviously Luke showing up. But where do you rank this one amongst the three finales we've had?
Yeah, two's definitely number one. Actually, I would put this number two. I think this was a really solid finale. I felt
Mm.
like, it had a nice, cheery ending, which, I don't always need, but it felt good. And the action was incredible. They didn't hold back on a lot of stuff. I thought this was a lot of fun. So I got to put this at number two.
Nice. And do you, for the season as a whole, what were your personal highlights from this particular season? I know, obviously, for a lot of people, the return of Ahmed Best as Kellyan to be the one that saved Grogu in Order 66 is definitely probably going to be one of the biggest highlights of the series. Obviously, it's definitely up there for me, simply because I'm also bit weird, but maybe I don't know if I describe this as an Order 66 fan, because I'm a big Revenge of the Sith fan, and seeing that whole sequence, not necessarily a fan of seeing everyone get killed, but if you know what I mean, that the whole sort of
Yeah.
aura that surrounds Order 66 and that event is something that I love to delve into. So for me, that's always obviously going to be a big highlight. But for yourself, what were your personal highlights for the series?
Yeah, honestly, I think that's number one, and maybe that's why I'm a little bitter because we didn't get more of it. Yeah, a big Jar Jar Binks fan, so getting on my best back was incredible. I feel like it does open the door for a lot of other theories, which I'm really excited about. And I'm also an Order 66 fan. I think it's such an emotional moment in the Star Wars universe
Mm,
that also like when you see people triumph over this tragedy, it makes it even better. And seeing Grogu and Kelleran get out of the situation, like it's not great that they were in it, but like how powerful that they were able to get out of it. And so that's a big one for me. I actually did really like, again, this is all stuff that I liked a lot, and I think my complaints are more so that we get more of it, but I liked the Dr. Pershing episode. I like learning about the cloning. I liked his presentation in like the Senate area. So all this stuff is really great, and I can't wait to get more of it.
They've spent a lot of time and energy into the cloning story, haven't they? They've spent a lot of the most recent series of Bad Batch sort of putting that in there. And obviously, as we've seen over the course of the entire Mandalorian, the 3 seasons, they've been obviously planting these seeds in there. So it's something that they clearly want to focus on to be able to bring everything together towards the sequels. We've got this film that we talked a little bit about earlier on that's going to be coming out in a few years' time that's going to be rounding off the whole Mandoverse, where they bring together all of the events of Mandalorian, Ahsoka, Book of Boba Fett, possibly Skeleton Crew as well. That's going to bring it together in this epic film that we're told that's going to result in an epic battle. So to me, this film is going to bring about all those storylines, but to me, it seems like it's also going to be where they sort of kick in the proper birth of the First Order. How are you feeling, just because that film's going to be so connected to these series? How are you feeling about that particular film that's going to be coming?
So I'm really excited about the film, and actually what I really want them to see them do is make Star Wars Episode 6.5, right? I think this is the perfect bridge between the sequel trilogy and the original trilogy. And honestly, I want to see them focus. I want to see Luke. I want to see Han. I want to see Leia in however capacity we can get it. And then, we can sprinkle the Dave Filoni stuff on top as well. So it's probably my most anticipated movie that was announced at Celebration. So I'm not exactly sure what it's going to look like, but, just to get whether it be like the original characters back, but also the Rebels characters, and just get them all in together and have this team. It's almost Avengers like to me, and I can't wait for it.
Nice. And then, speaking of obviously the Rebels characters, we know that they're coming back in the Ahsoka series, and we got to see that epic trailer come out of Celebration for it. I spoke with Chris, my guest from last week, about it. I want to get your thoughts as well. How are you feeling about the Ahsoka series coming up, and what are your personal predictions for it?
Ooh, predictions. That's tough. I'm super excited, obviously. A big Rebels fan, and seeing all these characters back. Hera, Sabine. I'm a big Mary Elizabeth Winstead fan in general, so seeing her take on one of my favorite roles as well, it's like just the perfect union. Oof, do I have any predictions? I don't have a prediction, but I have a concern. I have a concern that Thrawn is actually not going to be a huge part of the season. I think that this very much could be the lead up to that Dave Filoni movie. But I'm excited to see it all. I think we'll get Ezra. I think they're going to get Ezra back, and it's going to be a perfect lead into that Dave Filoni movie.
I think you're right. I think in terms of Thrawn's is it that red herring thing that Disney tend to do a lot with their trailers and stuff, where they're giving you all this information, and they're sort of going, this person's going to play a huge role, and then their overshadowing influence is big throughout the series, but you don't necessarily get to see an awful lot of them. And one thing I saw that is obviously building up to this big film and this big battle that's maybe going to bring about the beginning of the First Order, because we know that they come from the Imperial remnants, is that Thrawn's the one that brings the military back, that turns into the First Order. Do you predict maybe with the Filoni film that's going to be rounding all this off that we perhaps then see the death of Thrawn, because we don't see him at all in the sequels as part of the First Order?
Yeah, I would be very shocked if this doesn't lead to a Thrawn death. Again, I can't rule anything out. Maybe he does die, and maybe he comes back as a clone. There's always that possibility in Star Wars. But I think if we really want a satisfying lead up to the sequel trilogy, I think he does have to die. Take his ass down. That's what I say.
Would your money be on, say, Ahsoka, or maybe Ezra, or possibly even Snoke showing up and sort of dispatching with him, because he's like, I'm the captain now, and he and dispatches him? How would you feel about a Snoke cameo coming into that film?
Snoke, I love Snoke, so I'm just counting down the minutes till we see him again, and I think it's inevitable that he's coming. So, if I had to put my money on it, I think I would bet on Ezra. I think Ezra, he's got some he's got some grievances there, and I think it would make sense for him to deal the final blow. So yeah, all money on Ezra here.
Nice. I think that is everything that we have sort of covered for Mando season 3. Now it's come to an end. I'm sad it's come to an end. I never like a series ending because I'm like, what am I going to watch now?
Mm-hmm.
I suppose, the next big thing really, whether it's Star Wars or Marvel or anything like that, is going to be Secret Invasion that comes out in sort of a couple of months' time.
Mm-hmm.
Michael, I'm really happy that you're able to come on today. It's been a pleasure to have you here. Tell everyone at home exactly where we can find you on social media.
Yeah, I'm on Instagram at StarkWarsPod. I say that up front. We're on all social media platforms, but Instagram is the best way to communicate with us. I try to do a lot of posting on there, a lot of stories, a lot of polls, a lot of interaction. I love to talk to people. So even if you don't check out the podcast, please follow us on Instagram at StarkWarsPod, because that's like kind of our community there. And I think that's kind of the heart of the Star Wars universe. So and you follow the Instagram, and then maybe you check out the link in the bio, and we can go from there. But we'll start with the Instagram.
Because you've got Instagram, you've got a Discord as well, which is great to obviously chat to not only yourselves but obviously the rest of the people that follow you and have those sort of Star Wars conversations. And what I love about your particular show as well is that that you tend to go live. You sort of do Twitch, was it Facebook and maybe YouTube? Correct me if I'm wrong on those. But sort of around this sort of time each week when you do your episodes. So definitely give Michael and Stark Wars a follow. You can catch them live when they go live on like we said, on YouTube, Facebook, Twitch. So you can interact with them as the show's going on, and you can put them off by putting some random comments in the chat for him to discuss with his guests at the time. But yeah, thank you so much for joining us, Michael. And I'll be back next week. I think next week I'm going to be discussing the Super Mario Bros. Movie. I'm going to have some guests for that as well. But thank you very much, and until next time, we'll see you later.
Adios.